What were maybe the biggest surprises for you in the last decade or in terms of wine price development?
I think I will have to go with...
I've been thinking about properly investing in wine for years now, so I thought I should ask someone who is really on the top of this game. The Danish company RareWine Invest is one of the largest and most trusted names in the industry. Mr. Jensen, the CMO of the company, has been delving deep into the topic with me and covered the ABC of wine investing in this hour-long episode. You can learn which allocation they recommend for a well-balanced portfolio, what makes a region or a winery eligible for investment, how it might change in the future, and how you can start investing yourself. Fascinating insights. I learned a lot. So enjoy! Lars, thank you very much for taking the time. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, and I'm very pleased to be here.
Can you please briefly introduce yourself and what your company is doing and what is maybe your function at the company?
Yeah, for sure. I'm the CMO of RareWine Group, a company which consists of three main business areas. One of them is RareWine Trading, a trading business. We buy rare and fine wine and sell to other professional merchants and consumers from all over the world. I think RareWine Trading is a top 5 company within the rare and fine wine segment of trading. Then we also have a business area called RareWine Invest, which, the name says it all, but it's wine investment. We help people, again, from all over the world with their wine investments. RareWine Invest is I think if we are not the biggest in the world, then we're at least number 2. So top 2 company within the small niche of wine investment, as we're also going to discuss today. And finally, we have a storage company called Nordic Freeport, which is it's a warehouse, it's a freeport, and we store wine, spirits on behalf of wine investors and collectors from all over the world. Our main warehouse is located in Denmark, but we also have a facility in England.
So I've been playing around with this thought of investing maybe seriously, even in wine, considering seriously my net worth. But could you maybe just briefly argue for wine investment? Why should one consider investing in wine?
Yeah, I'm not saying that wine investment is for everyone, not at all. But if you are the kind of person who has a low to medium, a low to moderate risk profile, and you have a long horizon, then wine investment can be an option for you. I'm not saying that you should put all your money in wine investments, because spreading your investment is also a good idea. And for people who already have a portfolio, perhaps in stocks or equity or whatever they invest in, spreading the risk by investing a small piece in wine is a really good idea. But if you are the kind of guy who are looking for high risk, high reward, then you'll get bored with wine investments, because nothing much will happen from one day to another. It takes time for wine to rise in price. I think we'll get back to that later. But just to put that straight, for wine investments, you should be the kind of guy who has low to moderate risk profile, and you're not in it for a short-term returns. You're in it for the long run.
What is the average duration of a wine investment that you deal with?
Yeah, our recommendation is at least 5 years. Many of our investors has a longer horizon than that. It can easily be 7 or 10, 12, 15 years. But somewhere from 5 to 15 years is our recommendation. And of course, it depends on who you are and your situation. And when we get to know you, we will select wines that suit your profile.
If one would consider investing in wine, how would you convince them? What is maybe the biggest difference between investing in stocks, even buying bonds, which is maybe more secure, and investing in wine? What would be the average difference in terms of returns?
If we look at the stock markets, let's start with that, because I guess most of your listeners already know or are familiar with the stock market in some way or another. And if you compare the stock market up against wine, I have some numbers here with me now. I brought the MSCI World, which is one of the broadest stock index that most of your listeners probably are familiar with. And if we take a 20-year horizon, the MSCI World is up by 412%, which is really good. It's an average of 8.5% per year. That is basically what you can expect of the stock markets, and more or less also of the wine markets. But there are some niches in the wine market that is doing better. And what we work with, the majority of the wines that we work with are from Burgundy and Champagne. And if we take, for instance, Burgundy, and compare Burgundy to the MSCI World in the same period. Burgundy is up by 651%, which is analyzed more than 10.6% per year. And if you take Champagne in the same period, it's up by 482%, which is it's more than 9% per year. So actually, wine, and especially Burgundy and Champagne, have outperformed the stock markets in the long run. But what's also important to consider here is the volatility, because the volatility in the wine markets is way lower than the stock markets. So if you wake up each morning and get a kick out of checking your stock and finding out whether your stocks are going up or down, well, you'll get bored with wine, because again, nothing will happen on a daily basis. It takes time, because the mechanisms in wine is, I guess we'll get back to that, but it's driven by consumption. And it takes time to consume enough wine for the prices to rise.
Mm-hmm.
It is a very stable asset. So if you like that, and you're not looking for up and down swings all the time, you like the stability and you have the time, I think wine is ideal. And in terms of returns, well, it is as good as the stock market, or perhaps a little bit better if you chose the right regions and the right wines.
Yeah, I think it's a very important point, especially in the era of Bitcoin, and it's a very important point in an investor's mind, or even if anyone's mind, basically, that you have a secure asset.
For sure, and of course, nothing is secure. You can also lose money in investing in wine, but wine is historically a very stable asset. If you look at the financial crisis, for instance, back in 2008, what we saw was, of course, wine also took a slight dip at the time, but nothing compared to the stock market at all. And after a year, less than a year, I think after 9 months, approximately 9 months, wine was back at the same level as before the financial crisis. Whereas for the stock markets, it took, more or less 4 years to get back to the same level as before the financial crisis. Because there is a lower limit for how cheap a wine can become before collectors and connoisseurs start buying up and think, oh, that is way too cheap for a bottle of Le Clève.
So you already mentioned two regions, Burgundy and Champagne, and I think most people who have followed the wine prices, or maybe working in the wine world, have also realized that the prices in these two regions have risen massively. But what are the major criteria when buying a certain label, or even betting on a region or wine style for you?
Yeah, for a company like ours, data is the main reason for suggesting one region over another, or one wine over another. Of course, we like drinking wine, and we love tasting wine, but perhaps if you and me, we share a bottle of wine, perhaps you like the wine and I don't like the wine, but none of us is right. It's a matter of taste. So we cannot base investment on taste, at least not as the only criteria. So we look at all kinds of data that we can find on the producers. It can be a proven track record of that producer on that vineyard for the last 10 years delivered a return of this or that. It can be data from the main wine critics, because there are a few of them. Robert Parker, perhaps the most known wine critic, they are big enough to influence wine prices. So of course, if Richard Chulin for Champagne, or Vignes, or the Wine Advocate gives 100-point score, it can also have an influence on the price. But also the coming vintages and what we can expect from them, and the harvest yields, and the expectations for the region in general. And there can be a lot of factors that we use to put into that algorithm that we work with to qualify a wine as being investment worthy, qualify a region to being investment worthy. But I think it's important to know that we work with only so few wines. As a rule of the thumb, we sometimes say that only 0.1 of all wine production is suitable for investments. Only 0.1 of all the wines produced all over the world are suitable for investments. So it's only a very, very small. It is a niche that we're dealing with here when talking about wine investment.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest differences in terms of investment in wine because it's gonna taste better, or investment in wine because it's gonna gain you money, right?
And you should get affected, because I also have my favorites wines that I like to drink, but it does not mean that it will eventually rise in price, at least not on a bigger scale. So we try to keep those things apart. Your taste is one thing, but what we invest in is something different. And of course, there will be some overlaps, for sure there are. And you can also have some preferences for a certain region or a certain producer. And we'll try to look into that when we come up with a suggestion for a portfolio for you. But we will never suggest a wine that we do not believe in. Talking about beliefs in our company, it's more or less down to data. If data do not show that this wine is having a huge potential or a huge upside in the future, we will never suggest it.
Mm. And how would you convince maybe a sommelier or someone who is working in the wine trade in some capacity to work with you, like basically to buy wine at your place and not buying wine for themselves and store them in their own cellar and then maybe sell them on the secondary market later?
Yeah, there are a lot of factors here to consider. But first of all, availability. It can be very difficult to get your hands on one of those bottles that are among the 0.1% of the best wines in the world. So availability of the best wines, that is one of the things that we can help you with. Another thing is, you mentioned it briefly, but storage. It's very important the day you sell the wine that you have a documented track record on the wine, what we normally refer to as provenance. The better you can document where the wine comes from, you bought it here and where was it before that, how has it been kept. You can easily tell me that it's been in your cellar and it's under optimal conditions, but you have no further documentation. I can trust your words, but perhaps I don't. And I will take the risk if I'm to drink that bottle. So I will probably pay a better price if you can show that it has been kept at a safe house, especially built for wine, and you can document the temperature at all time and the humidity any date in the past. The better documentation you have, the better price you can have for them. Also, another thing to consider here is if you decide that you want to establish the perfect conditions at home, it can be costly. But also the fact that you have to insure the wine, because if somebody breaks into your house and steals your wine, I'm quite sure that you'll be happy if you have great insurance. So insurance is also a part of it that you have to consider. And another very important thing here is also storage without paying VAT, because that is what we can offer through a free port. And that is what all professional wine investors do. They store their wine on bonded warehouses or free ports somewhere in UK or in Europe, because in that way they can actually invest for a larger fee because they are not paying the VAT up front. So that is another thing that we can offer. And finally, what most wine investors, hobby investors, they fail to realize is that at some point they will have to sell the wine again. And it's not necessarily that easy to find the right buyer that is willing to pay the right price for your wine. Of course, you can go to the local merchant and hope that his bid is good enough or he's interested at all. But if you really want the best possible price, you have to offer your portfolio, your wine, to a wide array of professionals and consumers from all over the world that are all interested in buying that wine. In that way, you can get the best price. And that is perhaps the biggest risk for a hobby wine investor who does it all by themselves if they do not have a valid way of selling the wines again in a few years' time.
So on that point, where do you usually sell the wines, or to whom?
Yeah, again, we have this company called RareWine Trading, as I told of in the beginning, our trading company. And on a daily basis, what we do is we buy and sell rare and fine wine. So we have a huge international network. We sell mainly to Europe, to North America, and to Asia. We deal with the professionals, and we deal with, let's call it, high-profile consumers, people who know what they're looking for and also are willing to pay the price for a certain bottle of wine or for the right bottle of wine. And they normally also buy more than just a bottle because they are, let's call them, professional consumers, or at least they know what they're dealing with here. So yeah, the wines are sold all over the world, but primarily to other wine professionals, other wine merchants. But it could also be in a shorter scale, of course, but Michelin restaurants or a fancy wine store on Manhattan or something like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it's very varied.
Yeah, sure. The impression people get when buying a bottle of wine is that I can just sell it the next day. And yeah, perhaps you can, but you're not supposed to do that because nothing will happen with the price. The price will probably be exactly the same as what you paid for it. It takes time for the wine to rise in price. And this is the big thing about wine investments. It takes time.
Speaking about regions again, maybe you already mentioned that only maybe 0.1% of the wines in the world are eligible to invest in if you want to gain profits. So which are the regions besides maybe the two you already mentioned, or which are the labels that you have to kind of deal with?
Yeah. Let's start discussing regions. Our recommended portfolio composition consists of approximately 40% wines from Burgundy, approximately 30% wines from Champagne. And then we are looking more and more to Italy. And we will suggest around 15% of the wines that you invest in should be from Italy. And speaking of Italian wines, it's mainly from either Tuscany or Piedmont area. And then the last portion is it could be a little position of some Bordeaux, but Bordeaux is very tricky. We can get back to that in a while.
Mm.
But the right Bordeaux wines are always a good investment for sure. And it could also be wines from rest of the world, as we call it. It could be wines from Napa Valley or a few others, Vega Sicilia, to be specific, from Spain, or even Pingus, for instance. Also, a few German wines could qualify here. But yeah, and then another interesting part of rest of the world category is whiskey. We also work with whiskey for investments, and whiskey is actually becoming more and more popular, not only for consumption, but also for collection and for investments. Whiskey have a brilliant track record, but it's even more niche than wine, making it a bit more volatile. So if you want whiskey in your portfolio, you normally have a higher risk profile than the average wine investor. But of course, it also has great opportunities for high returns on whiskey.
Yeah,
And
because
for us,
I already taken a look on statistics about whiskey, and on average, I think it made, I think, more return for investors in the last 10 or 20 years than wine in average, right?
yeah, certainly.
Mm.
But it also comes with a larger downside, because the risk for investing in whiskey is a bit higher, because it's so much of a niche. So it's more volatile towards trends, and perhaps it's becoming trendy to drink a gin or tequila or something else. And also, whiskey have, at least for many years, been a thing for a male audience, and therefore also only for more or less 50% of the population. Yeah, it can come at a huge upside, but you also have to be aware that there's a bigger risk when investing in whiskey, for sure. But it's very interesting, and whiskey is, right now at least, very popular in the market.
And you already mentioned that your portfolio, or what you recommend, is at least 70% France, but maybe even 75 if you consider Bordeaux, or maybe even higher. Wouldn't you say that it is a little risky to invest in just one region, like 40% of your allocation? Dear friends, I have to talk to you about something really magical. The last 2 years were quite challenging for me, working at least 45 hours a week as a sommelier, planning our wedding, keeping my workout goals in check, and studying for the WSET diploma on the side. It was not unusual for me to feel sluggish, unfocused, and unmotivated even. But the last 2-3 months were much easier thanks to one product, Magic Mind. This little green drink is a tasty combination of 12 main ingredients, including mushrooms, nootropics, adaptogens, and vitamins, respectively. It was created by accomplished scientists, such as Dr. Andrew Weil. Maybe you know him from the Joe Rogan podcast. And besides boosting productivity, it even helps reducing daily stress with active ingredients like ashwagandha. So instead of drinking 8 espressi a day like before, I just had one shot of Magic Mind every day after lunch with one espresso, an hour before my study sessions. And I was back in the game, feeling sharper and more focused without the roller coaster effect of any other common stimulants. The awareness, better focus, and to be honest, even better mood has lasted into the late hours that work beyond 10 p.m. Even the taste is quite pleasant, especially if you keep it chilled in the fridge. I think everyone needs a push in his or her daily hustle, and I think Magic Mind could work for you just as well as it has worked for me. And if you want to get it cheaper than others, you can get a staggering 56% off your first subscription via the link in the show notes, or 20% off your one-time purchase if you use the code WINEGHOST20 in the checkout. That's WINEGHOST without the usual S at the end, 20 in the checkout. But you can find everything in the show notes.
Investing in more regions is always our recommendation. It is not different from other investments because what you always aim for when you invest is spread the risk, to have a diversified portfolio. And even within wine investments, we also try to have this divestment of different areas. But of course, there are some areas that have a proven track record and where data also points into the direction that will be very interesting in the future. Let's stick with Burgundy for a second. What we see in Burgundy is that, first of all, it's more or less, at least the wines that we work with here, is normally in the Grand Cru and then few Premier Crus. And it's micro production, what we see in Burgundy, compared to more or less all other wine regions. And it is very high in demand. So we will always be in favor of the investor with this micro production and very high demand. But also when we look at the future trends, because the wines from Burgundy are known to be very light and elegant. They are not as heavy as, for instance, a traditional Bordeaux wine. And the lighter expression in the wine is actually very appealing for the modern consumers as well, because what we are looking into is the future of changing habits. The diets that we have is changing. It's becoming lighter. We do not eat as much meat as we did 10 years ago. We perhaps have a more open mind towards other products than meat in general, which also make our diets lighter. And therefore, our drinking habits will also change. So the wine that suits the food that we are going to consume more of in the future should also be lighter. And that is the expression that we have in Burgundy. So there are also some mega trends pointing in the right direction for Burgundy. It's not only consumption and the high demand and the micro production that does it for Burgundy. And of course, we have quality that is almost uncomparable in Burgundy, at least from the Côte d'Or area. The white wines in Burgundy are second to none. If we talk about Champagne, what we have in Champagne is we have typically a larger production than what we see in Burgundy. But of course, only a very small percentage of the champagne produced is available or is suitable for investments. And that is normally the vintage champagnes and the prestige cuvées. And if you just stick with the vintage champagnes, I think the numbers are a bit rough here, but around only 10% of all champagnes produced is vintage champagne, perhaps less than that. So already there we can sort out 90% of all champagne for investment. And the champagnes that are suitable for investments are also champagnes that are consumed very, very often, because there's not the same saving tradition for champagnes that we see, for instance, in Bordeaux. It's not uncommon that people store older Bordeaux wines. But champagne is being drunk all the time. It's being drunk on bars and nightclubs. It's being drunk on hotels. It's being drunk at anniversaries or celebrations all the time, anywhere and all over the world. And also the younger generation are very much into champagne. It also suits the lighter diets that we talked about before. So what we see in champagne is mega consumption, and that makes the best champagnes very suitable for investment as well.
And you already touched a little bit on Bordeaux.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate on your
for sure.
stand?
I like drinking Bordeaux. Don't get that wrong. Some of the best wines that I've tasted, they come from Bordeaux. But what we also see in Bordeaux is generally a larger production than what we see in for instance, Burgundy. Also, it's not uncommon that the chateaus themselves, the producers, store some quantity in the cellar of their wines. So at some point, they can, in the future, release more bottles from a certain vintage, which will devaluate the wines in the market. That's always a risk. And also what we see in terms of consumption, the Bordeaux wines, at least traditionally, are known to be very heavy. It does not suit the lighter diet and the elegant expression that people the modern consumer are aiming for at the moment. So the consumption of Bordeaux wine is not as huge as it used to be. And that's also a thing worth considering. And then when we look at the prices for Bordeaux wine, they typically come very expensive because Bordeaux traditionally, historically, have always been the area with most prestige, and therefore also a higher price tag. But you can find comparable wines from many places in the world that are available at a lower price for consumption. So there are a few factors that also point into the direction that Bordeaux is not as attractive as it has been. Growth, the biggest chateaus, and the Cheval Blanc, the Le Pen, the Mouton Rothschild, the Petrus, they will always be popular in demand, and they can, of course, form a good investment, but it's very, very limited actually. At least if you look at data. But of course, you can buy a wine, Bordeaux wine en primeur, and you can be lucky that the wine critics like it when it's released into the market and you get a high score, and then prices will rise on a short term. But that is more of a lottery ticket than it's a strategy. So for that nature, we are very careful when selecting Bordeaux wines for a portfolio.
Mhm. So usually if you buy Bordeaux, it's red and famous house, like basically a handful.
Yeah, it normally comes with a name, and yeah, it is mainly the red wines from Bordeaux that are attractive for investments for sure.
I want to just spontaneously touch on a topic which came to mind talking about these three regions. It's the climate change, because I think it's also a big talk in Bordeaux that I think it was not actually so bad for Bordeaux in terms of vintage variation, but maybe it's not so favorable for Burgundy or even Champagne, maybe in the future. What's your take on that? And do you think this kind of recommendation of allocation is going to change with time and how the climate is maybe changing?
Yeah, I'm sure that climate change will have some effects on our recommendations also in the future. But here again, we have to go two separate ways, because if you're a wine lover, climate change is horrible because it results in a smaller production, for instance, in Burgundy. But if you're a wine investor, you actually like that the production is getting smaller because the wines is getting more and more difficult to get your hands on. So if you have some of it in your portfolio, it will most likely rise in price. So yeah, I'm really sad to take out the romance of wine investment because, but it is a split road here. For as a wine lover myself, I hate the fact that wine is getting harder to obtain in the future and it's getting more expensive most likely. But as a wine investor, on the other hand, it's not that bad. But yeah, I can totally understand the people that look at wine with a more romantic perspective than the wine investors do. But we also have to remember that the wine investors and wine romantics are each other's yin and yang, because the wine investor cannot do without consumers, and the consumers cannot do without people saving wine. Because if we were to buy a bottle of wine today, I would prefer something with a little age. And if it was all drunk too young, it wouldn't be possible. So I'm actually happy that some people store wine away. That will make it possible for you and me to drink a perfectly mature Petrus from 82 or something like that.
What are maybe the emerging markets or even regions from wine investment? I'm just giving you an example. I recently visited Sicily, the winery of Passo Pischiaro, and they kind of check almost all the boxes for me to invest in, because they are also making very valuable wines, like over 100 euros, very limited production of a single vineyard with only 3,000 bottles. So but Sicily is probably not a main investment market at the moment. But do you see that these regions, even Greece or I don't know, other nations which have a very particular and very limited production, they're going to be on the horizon in the near future?
Yeah, I think so. It's naturally markets that we follow, markets that we visit and try the wines, we taste the wines. But again, even though the price is relatively high for a bottle of wine, and even though production could be low, they will still lack a lot of branding, and they will still lack a proven track record of wines that have been rising in price for many, many years. So another good example is if you talk about sparkling wine. I think most people are thinking of sparkling wine as champagne, but they also produce outstanding sparkling wine in the southern part of England, for instance. If you and me, we went to a restaurant and they offered a glass of wine from the southern part of England, or they offered champagne, I think most people will still go with the champagne because they benefit from 100 years of branding and marketing. It's a well-known brand. Everybody knows champagne. We all know that the best sparkling wines, they are made in Champagne. Of course, there's a lot of knowledge and a lot of other things going on, and it's been like that for ages. So it is very, very difficult to change that, at least in an investment perspective, because what we still need for investment is that the wines are to rise in price and not just a little bit, but actually some percentages each year to actually be worth the while, worth the wait. And as long as you do not see that from Sicily or the southern part of England or other wine regions, we're not recommended it for investments, at least only for hobby investments or for people who are very aware that this is a chance, this is a lottery ticket, and it might be very good, but there's also a chance that it will never rise substantially in price, even though it's very, very good wine, very high quality. I've also tasted quite a few Sicilian wines, and they are beautiful.
What were maybe the biggest surprises for you in the last decade or in terms of wine price development?
I think I will have to go with Champagne here, because Burgundy have been rising in price, but so has Champagne. And at least the last, looking apart from the last year and a half, but the 2 years before that, the rises we saw in Champagne was absolutely outstanding. It was crazy. We expected it a little bit because our data showed that the price of grapes in Champagne, the price of land in Champagne was rising for more than 25 years, more than the price of a bottle of champagne. So it was almost inevitable that the price of champagne would go up at some point. Otherwise, it wouldn't be sustainable at some point. So we expect that. But the corona pandemic, the COVID-19 changed the game. And the price rises we saw after that was even more than we expected, even more than what data could have shown us beforehand. So I think I will have to say that was the biggest surprise for the last decade. That was the champagne prices post the COVID-19 pandemic.
And do you think it's going to continue in the coming years?
Not with the same pace, but still the best champagnes are way too low priced if you compare to the best Bordeaux or the best Burgundy. The best Burgundy or the best Bordeaux are way more expensive than the best champagnes. And there's basically no good reason for that. So I still expect that champagne will rise in price, but more moderate than the post-corona pandemic period, because that was something out of the ordinary. So I still expect the future for champagne that is very positive. Also, I think what we see, the trend is going upwards for sparkling wine and white wines, rosé wine, champagne rosé, ongoing and positive consumption trends for that sort of wine. And then Asia, China is also becoming more and more interested in champagne. I think there's a lot of things going on in China at the moment. So perhaps it'll take maybe a little longer before we are there. But at some point, I think China will also be a very, very large market for champagne. It already is, but it will be even more so in the future. It's just a matter of time.
Mm-hmm. And do you only invest in still and sparkling wines, or do you also consider maybe port or even sweet wines?
Yeah, not really. Port wine, I really like to drink it, but to be honest, it's only once or twice a year. I drink a glass of port wine. I really enjoy it, and I do, but it's so much a niche product compared to wine or sparkling wine. And also production. It's not very difficult to find a 100-year-old port wine. You can buy a 100-year-old port wine for a very low fee. So no, I don't see port wine as a investment opportunity for the masses. But if you are very into port wine and know the market for port wine, of course you can make money out of it. But it's not what we recommend for the regular investors. It isn't. But I like to drink it. It's really nice, but I should perhaps do more often.
Yeah, and I think probably sweet wine is also in the same category, right? It's not very limited anymore.
Exactly. Again, the consumption of port wine is nothing compared to the consumption of red wine and white wine and sparkling wine. And we need the consumption for the wines to rise in price.
So maybe a little bit about practical things. How could one start with wine investment at RareWine? So what is the minimum amount to invest? And are there any maybe other, regulations what you have to commit to, or kind of rules what you have to commit to?
Basically, you can invest in just a case of wine. So it can be 6 bottles of Sassicaia, 6 bottles of something that we find suitable for investments. So you can start for, a couple of €1,000. But we recommend a certain risk spread, as we already discussed. We want to diversify the risk and optimize your chances for bigger gains. So we always recommend that you buy wines from more areas. We always recommend that you also buy from more producers in those areas. Again, to optimize your chances for the big win, and also to minimize the risk for some of them are falling in price. For 10,000 euros, you can build a really fine portfolio with a great risk spread. Yeah, to put up some more numbers, I think the average investor comes to RareWine Invest, invests around 30,000 euros as a start. That's the average investor. But again, you can get started for a couple of thousand euros or a little bit less, actually. Depends on the case, the investment case, the wine you buy.
Mm-hmm. And how is it like from steps to step? Like I give you my money and you choose the wine for me, or do I also have a saying in that, or how does it work?
Yeah, you also have a say, of course. It's a recommendation. Our portfolio managers, they come up with a recommendation. They made a portfolio for you depending on your risk profile, your desired horizon, and your entry fee. And also we discuss if your portfolio should be actively taken care of during the period, or you just want to save the wine for 10 years and then sell them on. But depending on that, they will come up with a suggestion for a portfolio for you. And of course, if you have any preferences, we will try to look into it, but we will never go with a wine that we don't believe in. So if you have been in Greece and you have been tasting a wine that you just think it's the best wine you've ever tasted, you want to invest all your money in it, we'll probably say no way, because we have no data that show this wine will rise in price. So that we can't do. But if you say, all right, I prefer a Massetto over Sassicaia, cool, no problem. We'll find a Massetto instead of Sassicaia. That we can easily do. So of course, you buy the wine. It's your choice in the end, of course. But we will never offer wines that we do not believe in.
Mm-hmm. And so this is basically my property, what you store for me.
Yes,
if I get it correctly. And so in that way, because it's not gold, so I can also drink it if I want, or I can do something with it. Is it possible to, I don't know, I have my third son born on 1st of January, and now I'm gonna go a big party on New Year's Eve. Can I get 3 bottles of Massetto if I want, or how does it work?
Yeah, you can. Basically, it's your wine, of course. But of course, if you have a case of 6 bottles of Massetto, we recommend that you take out all 6 bottles instead of breaking the case, because a full case that has never been opened represents a bigger value per bottle than 3 bottles in an open case. So of course we have some recommendations if you do that, and of course we also have a RareWine Trading, the trading company. So if you only want that single bottle of Massetto, I suggest you buy just that one bottle through a trading company instead of splitting your case of 6.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is your wine. You can do it if you want to, but of course we will let you know that the value per bottle will probably fall a bit because you're breaking a full perfect case.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it is your wine, so yeah, it is your property.
Is there a minimum requirement or a minimum duration for that I should keep the wine with you with?
Yeah, again, it is your wine, and if you want to sell it, you can list it up for sale at any point. Again, it's your product. But our recommendation would be at least 5 years and often more. Because if you buy a case of wine today and you want to sell it tomorrow, nothing has happened with the price. But we still take our commission for selling it. So it'll be a bad deal for you. So we always recommend that you wait those approximately 5 years and more for the consumption to do its work and for the wines to start rising in price. And that's the best way to ensure that you will get a decent return in the end.
Uh-huh. And are there any tax incentives to investing in wine?
No, not really. Wine is taxed in most countries. Like if you invest if you buy a diamonds or Rolex designer watch or something like that. But I know there are some countries that has different rules. I'm not a tax expert in every country in the European Union, but I know some countries have exceptions for products that are consumable, which wine certainly is. But buying wine through a company called RareWine Invest also means that you know what you're doing. You're buying the wine for investment. You do not buy for consumption. So So no, the general rule of the thumb is there's no tax incentive to invest in wine. And with that said, there are still some exceptions. There are some countries that look different on wine because it's a product for consumption.
Thank you very much. Is there anything what you'd like to add?
Oh, I think we've had a great discussion. But if I think we came a bit briefly on one of the areas, I think it was Italy.
Yeah.
I like Italian wines myself, especially at the moment. I have this thing for Italian wine, traveling a bit in Italy as well and visiting a lot of producers there and tasting a lot of the wines from Barolo, Barbarescos, the Brunellos, Super Tuscans, the Chianti, and it's extraordinary what we see in Italy these years. It's certainly an area to keep an eye for in the future. I think the Brunellos, the Barolos, the Barbarescos for that case in vintage 15, 16, even 19, 20, 21, we'll see soon, are some of the best wines that have ever been produced in Italy. So something good is going on in Italy these years. I'm very impressed by what I see. And I also think that the way at least in Barolo have mapped all the vineyards, as we know it from Burgundy, is very much in line with the modern trends, that the modern consumer, they want to know exactly where does the grapes come from in that bottle of wine. All right, it's right there on the map. I can see it here. I can even stand next to the vineyard and taste the wine, and I can taste that vineyard up against that vineyard. So I think a lot of good things are going on in Italy. I also think that the generation of wine producers that we are seeing now and have seen for some years now, they are experimental in a very good way. They are, I like to call them nerds, and that is very, very positive because they are really nerdy about wine production. They are taking Italian wine production to a whole new level. We also see that in Sicily, actually, as you mentioned before. Something good is going on in many parts of Italy. But for investments, it's still the traditional areas. It's the Piedmont and it's the Tuscany area that has a proven track record. But yeah, I see habits are changing in Italy. They are also producing wines now that are drinking very well when they're released into the markets. You don't have to store them away for 10 or 15 years for the wine to be decent. They are actually very elegant from a much earlier stage, what we have seen before in Italy. So that's certainly one of the regions that we pay a lot of attention to. And it's also, yes, one of the regions that we perhaps may at some point in the future change the recommendation for. Right now, it's around 15% we recommend for Italian wines. But I think at some point in the future, it'll perhaps rise a bit, the percentage for Italian wine, because so many good things are going on, right? And they're also priced at a very attractive level compared to Bordeaux and Burgundy and even Champagne. So you get a lot of value for the money in Italy. And as times are now, with trouble in Ukraine and in the Middle East, we have a potential conflict between China and the US. We have the election coming up in the US soon. So many things going on in the world right now. Also make people a little bit more, conservative in terms of what to spend their money on. What we see right now in Italy is what we call affordable luxury, because people will still spoil themselves with a little luxury. But the Italian wines, the best Italian wines, are still very cheap compared to the best Burgundy wines. So it's more or less it's a steal, but you can still get that luxury product, but for a tenth of the price. So it's affordable luxury, and that means a lot of consumption. And consumption is good for a wine investment as well. So that's one of the drivers for Italy also in the years to come. Massive quality, massive consumption, bigger focus, and changing habits. I think Italy is very, very interesting.
Yeah, I can only underline that. I was actually at Summa a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
At Alois Lageter. Do you know this event?
I know the event, but I haven't been there, unfortunately.
I can only recommend it. Obviously, I think around 40, 50%, maybe even more of the producers were Italian. And I was also, I'm quite young and I'm 31 years old and I've been in the wine industry for 8 years. But I've also seen an evolution, as you already mentioned, in the younger generation of Italians, because I think the older ones, they were not the best in the English language either. So they couldn't really communicate their production and where they come from and what the idea is. And also, I think they were more focused on Italy, and they were not really open to the world and about also maybe practices in Burgundy, and also maybe how to make lighter, more approachable wines. And I think they were stuck a little bit in the past, and also just looking towards Tuscany or the Super Tuscan as an example. So use a lot of barrique and
Yeah,
just a lot
exactly.
of extraction and robust wines. But that has changed a lot. Actually, the next episode after you, it's gonna be with Castello di Ama,
Yeah,
and I think
very nice place. Very nice place.
yeah, this
Thanks.
is one of the best examples for me because also the single vineyard wines, the San Lorenzo, for example, these are very approachable in the use, very elegant wines. Obviously, these are not the cheapest wines in the world, like over 200 euros, but still, as you say, it's compared to Mutter Rothschild, it's a steal. And I think these wines also with Gran Selezione, and they also like delineate the UGAs even more, even better, and it's going to be even more detailed than it is now. And I think they are also taking this Burgundy Barolo way, and also Etna, which I already mentioned, with all the contradas, that they kind of pinpoint differences, also subtle changes in the terroir, and I think this is the way which they should follow up. And I can only agree with you as a kind of amateur that I also see this kind of clear line in the.
Yeah, for sure. And I actually think that Castello di Ama is a brilliant example of that. And if you ever get the chance to visit them in Italy, please go there. It's an amazing place they have, really.
I will.
Yeah, you mentioned the San Lorenzo, but the La Parita and their other wines as well. They are absolutely extraordinary these years. And yet they are still affordable if you want to prioritize wine. They are not as expensive as a bottle of Romani Conti or some of the most expensive Burgundy wines. It's actually affordable for many people, and yet so much quality.
Yeah. And also longevity, because I think Sangiovese is capable of being really like Brunello, actually, or is the best example, or one of the best examples, that they are capable of aging for decades.
I totally agree. Yeah, and speaking of Castello di Ama, we actually had a tasting here at our headquarters in Denmark. Castello di Ama
Cool.
was here and had this tasting for investment clients, and still Castello di Ama is not a common product for investments, and it will only be their top wines that could be in the best vintages relevant for investment. But it was also a chance for us to introduce the Castello di Ama wines and their secondary wines as well to an audience of wine collectors and wine investors who actually like really good wine. And they were quite impressed, I can tell you, even though we do not have enough data to say that all of the Castello di Ama wines are suitable for investment, but few of them are, or at least they are becoming. And I can tell you that the people who tasted it there, they were blown away. Absolutely amazing quality.
Yeah, it only takes time, as you already said earlier, right? It's just the big advantage of the traditional French markets, as they have been doing it for centuries, and they have a very strong image in their consumers' head, and that's going to drive consumption for sure.
For sure.
Cool, Lars. Thank you very much. I think that this last edition was also needed to be maybe even more complete. Thank you very much, and very insightful. And thank you very much for this very detailed information that you just provided.
Well, thank you for having me. And yeah, for all your listeners, I hope that some of them are curious on wine investment as well, even though we discussed a lot of areas and a lot of numbers, but there were a lot of facts here. And I thought it was very interesting having this conversation. So thank you for having us and putting focus in this topic.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Thank you.
You too. Bye-bye.